Have you ever wondered what it would be like if you threw John Wick into National Lampoon's Vacation? If you have, I question your thinking, but nonetheless, you luckily might have a movie that fills that itch in Nobody 2. But for me, this movie was kind of a mixed bag. So when Nobody 2 starts, we follow Hutch once again, who is stuck in a mundane 9 to 5 existence, much like the first film. Except in that movie, he was an accountant. In this movie, he is back to killing, and he has found himself stuck in a loop of contracts every day. And because of this, he is pulling away from his wife and kids. He's becoming isolated, so he brainstorms a genius idea. Him and his family are going to go to this water park called Plummersville, I believe, that he went to when he was a kid. And this is where our sequel begins. Now, the idea of expanding on the lore of him and his family and getting to know them a little bit more and getting to know the backstory of his wife and all of that, I think is a really cool idea because, as I always say, we already did what happened in the first film. Let's expand on it. Let's do something new. The idea of going to a new location and meeting more characters and expanding on everything we already know sounds really good on paper, but unfortunately, I don't really think this movie ever actualizes what it's setting out to do. And it kind of goes off the rails a little bit and becomes a little bit convoluted in what it's trying to achieve, but there is still fun to be had. The magic of this franchise is obviously Bob Odenkirk as our everyday nobody. Much like me or you, he's every guy you see walking along the street. He could completely blend in. You would never imagine this guy to be a trained assassin, which, as I've said a couple of times already, has become an oversaturated subgenre in its own. I feel like we have so many of these John Wick clones now where they're trying to up the ante and take the dorkiest, nerdiest, most everyday guy ever and make them do these. I think Bob Odenkirk is really good in this role, though, as he was in the first film, but this is the gift and the curse of this franchise, how much you can suspend your disbelief watching him in particular pulling off these acts, because they set the bar pretty high with how you have to suspend that. I thought the pace of this film was kind of all over the place. It's simple enough. He's taking his family to this water park for vacation, and obviously some shit's going to happen, and he's going to have to pull out his sleeper agent self like he did in the first film. But this movie is kind of convoluted, in which you have him at the water park. There's an arising incident where he has to respond to, but there's like 5 or so different subplots moving at the same time that it just keeps kind of going A, B, C, D through. And because of this, you never really get to actualize what I said in the opener of getting to know his family and expand on that angle more. And I kind of wanted more of that in the sequel. It's a brisk watch. It's under 90 minutes, I believe. But as for the pace itself, as I just said, it's structured kind of silly. Felt like almost every scene played out the same way. You have Bob Odenkirk's character show up to a scene, and obviously we know he's this highly lethal assassin. Nobody else knows this. He's your everyday nobody. But he'll get into a conflict with somebody, no matter how serious, no matter how minor, and he'll basically say, "Sorry, man, I don't want to do this." Then they'll taunt him and call him old man before he has to say, "Please don't make me do this," and then he kicks their ass. And it feels like that's kind of formulaically how this movie progresses. About 5 or 6 different subplots. As I said, it follows that same structure everywhere he goes, which, as I've already said, is kind of the magic of these movies because he's your everyday guy. But at the same time, it gets kind of old watching him say the same thing to every person he encounters. Where I think the first movie succeeds, it's pretty sharp. We've gotten a lot of these clones, but I think that movie was fresh. This movie felt a little bit flat to me, which I don't know if that's a good word, but that's the word I keep arriving on, because it felt like this movie was really trying to do what the first movie did naturally, but force it down your throat because we need more action. We need to make it bigger. And I think that's part of the reason that structure did feel so formulaic, and it did play out the same way, as I already said. I did really enjoy the aesthetic of this movie, though, going to this water park, this tropical getaway, very Margaritaville. I think it's a really cool aesthetic for a movie. I am a big fan of like synth 80s vibes and that aesthetic, and I think this movie really captures that. So I think you can have a lot of fun with that, and you eventually do, as I'll get into in just a sec. The movie is also surprisingly gruesome. I was not expecting the level of gore and the commitment to that. This movie has some pretty nasty scenes, if I'm being honest. You overuse the hell out of slow motion. It feels like almost every single kill or every single graphic moment has slow motion attached to it. That being said, the gore and the graphics are top notch. You get a lot of teeth knocked out. You get a lot of cuts across the face. Very bloody and gory. The audience I saw this with was visibly wincing numerous times. But the fact that this movie is so committed to the silliness and the comedy really relieves you of that gruesome nature. This was a different type of film. I would maybe say this movie tonally doesn't mesh, but I think because it is so committed to being silly, it just comes off as a comedic relief more so than taking you out of the action itself, which I kind of like. But the biggest letdown of this movie for me was the villain. I did not like the major villain of this movie at all. Need to say major because there's like 3 or 4 major conflicts, I believe. But I did not like her character at all. I thought she was poorly acted. I thought she was way over the top, way overacted, way overcooked. The writing did not work for me at all. I thought her character was completely out of place. Absolute cartoon buffoonery. Did not like it. It was cringe. And I hate to say that word because, as I just said, this movie is very self-aware. It's comedy heavy, but I just didn't like her character. And as the main moving point of this film, it's a huge letdown when you get to it. Also, getting back to what I said when I said there's a lot of moving parts in this movie, there's a lot of like subplots. There's so many, in fact, when you get to that final resolution, the massive conclusion these movies always have, like the Home Alone style, they need to introduce an entire new character to take on one of these plots, because if they didn't, the entire conclusion of this movie would have been like an hour long itself, which I didn't fully mind because I think the scenes involving the new character are really good. In fact, they're some of my favorite scenes. But that doesn't take away from the fact I feel like they are completely out of place. This character came completely out of the sky. But all of this being said, I thought the final 15 to 20 minutes of this film, when you get the giant Home Alone setup like the end of the first film that takes place at the water park, the scene I'm not going to spoil that takes place at the cottage, I thought it was so cool and so well done. It really won me back over to this movie because I was kind of not feeling it up until that point. But I thought the final resolution of this film, the traps they set up, the use of the water park, some of the visuals, was really cool, and I had a really good time, and I found myself chuckling, laughing, and just enjoying the silliness of the action. So overall, mixed bag for me. I think there are things that really don't work in this movie that come off really flat, tonal whiplash at points, kind of half-cooked plot, but at the same time overstuffed. But I did really enjoy the action and silliness of this movie, much like the first film, and I am anxiously looking forward to what they could possibly do with a third based on the cliffhanger of this movie. If you're like me and you like the first film, I think this movie's a pretty safe bet that you'll at least have a good time like I did. When you see Nobody 2, come back, let me know what you think. Comment, like, subscribe down below. I will see you in the next review. Peace.